Hey, I'm Mason King, host of the IBJ podcast. And before we get into this week's episode, I want to tell you about the newest podcast from IBJ Media called Off the Record with the Indiana 250. In each episode, IBJ Media CEO Nate Feldman talks with a different leader on the Indiana 250 list of the state's most influential leaders. They discuss their vision for Indiana's future, their experiences in business, and their advice for other aspiring entrepreneurs. New episodes are released on select Thursdays. So go subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you can never miss an episode. Just search the Indiana 250 Off the Record. Thanks. This is the IBJ podcast for the week of November 13th, 2023, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Regular listeners know I occasionally reference IBJ's annual list of the 25 fastest growing companies in the Indianapolis area. It is not an easy list to get on. To have a shot in making the top 25, your company needs to have revenue growth of at least 80% over the prior 3-year period. So, for example, in 2018, the number one firm was the Garrett Companies, a developer of apartment complexes, which that year reported a jaw-dropping 1,284% in revenue growth between 2015 and 2017. Since then, the company has continued on its tear, appearing on the Fast 25 list in 2021, 2022, and this year, 2023. And here is a mind-blowing statistic. Since its founding in 2014, just less than 10 years ago, annual revenue for the Garrett Companies has risen from zero to $501 million in 2022, making it the 37th largest private company in Indiana. So, you might be curious to know, who is Garrett? Well, that would be Eric Garrett, founder and CEO of the Greenwood-based Garrett Companies. He's 46 years old. He grew up in Evansville and at, or maybe just a little bit below, the poverty line. As we'll hear in the interview today, one of the seminal moments of his childhood was moving with his mom into their very first apartment. And it's probably not entirely a coincidence that he found his niche in real estate, first on the finance side, and then picking up experience as part of a development firm. By the time he struck out on his own in 2014, he had a very clear vision of what he wanted to build, both in terms of the kind of product and the kind of company. Probably the quickest way to say it is that he constructed the Garrett Companies so that it would have nearly every element of the apartment development process under one roof, including site selection, design, material sourcing, construction, landscape architecture, and even a restaurant company with its own brands of brewhouse and coffee shop for mixed-use projects. The Garrett Companies then can offer those services to other developers to fund new revenue streams. Eric Garrett is our guest today for a fascinating conversation about the origins of the company, a business model that you could shorthand as a rising tide lifts all ships, the firm's recent growth to nearly 300 companies despite a very deliberative hiring process, and how his role as CEO has evolved as the firm has sped through several ages of the corporate growth process. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Eric Garrett, the founder and CEO of Garrett Companies. Eric, thanks for making time today.
Thanks for having me.
In the simplest possible terms, right? I'm a fourth grader that you met at a party. Don't ask what I'm doing there. Explain to me what the Garrett Company does.
Well, I have a fourth grader, so let's see if I can do this. The Garrett Companies is a vertically integrated.
Oh, see, you already lost me. Vertically integrated. What's that?
The Garrett Companies develops apartment properties throughout the country. We develop them, So we go out, we find the sites, we get all the entitlements, and we work with the city to make sure we can build what we want to build. We construct them. So we have our own construction company. We're out building these projects. Then we manage them afterwards. And there are other various parts and components of the company that aid all of those different facets of the company: development, construction, management, related companies that we own. But essentially, that's what we do.
How do you describe the typical Garrett project? I mean, are there common elements basically in your portfolio?
Yeah, the common elements are you're typically looking at a 200 unit plus project. So you're talking about a $40 to $90 million project is the average size project. 99% of what we do is multifamily. We do have a restaurant group that has it's basically an amenity function for our properties. We have a coffee shop as well that we plug in to a lot of the apartment properties, but primarily apartment deals and in that size range throughout the country.
Do we call this upscale or luxury or?
Yes, absolutely. There's, I would say that, there's the typical finishes that go into our projects, are online or at par with what you would consider the highest end product in the market. Not necessarily a high rise, but when we're talking about, we build garden apartments. So we're talking 4-story, 2 to 3, 4-story projects. Now, I say 3-story, we primarily build 2 and 4, and there's a reason behind that. There's a bit of the system that applies towards that. And it seems to be a function better for our residents.
So when you're looking for sites, I mean, you're looking for sites that will work for a high-end project.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you think about it, if it's a location that Whole Foods wants to be in, it's a location that we're going to want to be in. If you want to boil it down to its simplest terms.
Oh, that's nice. That's a good example. Okay. So yeah, and then you have, I'm sure, a clubhouse, fitness centers, outdoor laying, heated pool.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the typical features that you would see in the typical luxury property. Then as you go into the finishes, obviously we've got plank flooring and 9-foot plus ceilings and tile backsplashes and marble countertops and so on and so forth. So anything that you would think of in a washers and dryers in every unit. We typically build a larger unit than most of our competitors. As the market has started building, downsizing the size of the units in order to cut costs, we felt like having 1,000 square foot average is more important than the cost factor.
So, I mean, obviously there's a ton of conversation in the multifamily industry about how high rents are. So you feel like you have a strong enough niche there that you're not worried about, whether or not people can absorb those rents?
Obviously, that's a concern for everybody. But yes, we differentiate ourselves by being able to, we control a large portion of the means of production that go into a multifamily project. We buy materials direct from manufacturers. They deal with wholesalers or middlemen. We buy lumber directly from mills. We're buying futures on the CME and hedging all of our lumber bets. So when people were paying $1,000 per foot for lumber, we were paying $200 to $300. So these type of in-house capabilities allow us to deliver the same product at a much better cost basis. So what I'm saying is, from a risk standpoint, we are building the same project for less money, which allows for a little more flexibility. If rents did come down, we could absorb it and be fine. Now, the reality is, what we're seeing right now in the market is what I would call the highest housing affordability gap that I've seen in my 20 plus years. And back in late 90s, early 2000s, you may only find a housing affordability gap, that cost between owning a home and renting. You may only have a gap in markets like Chicago or New York or LA. But now it's every market, primarily because of interest rates, but combined with construction costs, which have increased, post-pandemic. So I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but I think that if I use history as the judge here, and I look at what happened after .com or after the CMBS blew up or after 2007, 2008, the market pricing or construction costs did not go down. I think a lot of us expected in 2008 that, hey, just wait a second, because in 2009, we're going to build a home for the cheapest price possible. And it didn't happen. And I don't think it's going to happen here either. I think it's going to flatline a little bit. The construction costs will continue to grow. I think that weighs on pricing. I think there's a lack of apartments being built. I think there's a lack of single family being built. I think pricing, the ones that are being built are going to be high. I think that interest rates obviously continue to compound the problem. And I think we're going to have more of a normalized interest rate environment. So probably that 6% range, not 2%, 3%. All of this tells me that we're going to have rental increases higher than expected over the next few years.
Rental
increases, costs, more higher rents.
Higher rents. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's only one way for rents to go when supply is down, households are continuing to be formed. I mean, yes, there are some pockets of overbuilding right now where you have a lot of apartments in one location. But even that, you're talking about a year's worth of inventory. So if those projects lease for a year, they'll be stabilized. And the next wave of apartments is going to be a lower number of apartments being built. So therefore, you're going to have lower supply, the same demand, and no real other option but to rent.
Get ready for an astoundingly dumb question. That's good for you?
Well,
higher rents are good?
I mean, obviously, yes. I mean, for us, it's a good thing. I don't know. It's just one of those things where we have mixed feelings. I don't think it's good necessarily for the country or for, the average everyday working person, but it's certainly for the industry, it bodes well. There are other things increasing in cost too. I mean, manpower, insurance, it helps offset some of those to make the deals profitable.
But you do have demand, for this high-end product, or else you wouldn't be building.
Hey, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we do have other product types that we build, just not as frequently. We do affordable housing as well. It's just a smaller piece of our portfolio. But, I see that's a very, very much needed product type. It's very difficult to get done. It's very difficult to control costs, to make sure it's really affordable. It's a tricky game, but we're part of that as well.
Well, let me go back to what you were saying. I think what you were alluding to with vertical integration and cost. So as you said, you're an integrated apartment developer, essentially meaning all of the services, all of the talent that you need are in-house. So we've kind of covered this a little bit, but tell me more. Why is it to your benefit for the company to have its own construction arm, its own design arm, its own landscape architecture arm, even its own retail arm with a restaurant and coffee shop brand that you can plug into your developments? You've built a kingdom where you only have to depend upon yourself.
It's about efficiencies. If you think about what Henry Ford brought to the automobile and the assembly line, it's the same theory here. We're trying to control the production of our product, and the only way to really control and to have efficiency is to build it and do it yourself, and to bring on those means. And we were willing early on to invest in. It's a very capital intensive program to bring on those entities, but we felt like, it would pay big dividends in a market like today, and it has. So, yeah. And, there are a lot of groups out there that are struggling with construction costs right now, and it's keeping their project on the sideline. We're not having those same issues, and we're able to get deals done still. Now, and I'll tell you, we have created a private equity firm based in Dallas, Texas. It's called Tellus Capital, and I'm a founding member of that. And we're providing a lot of general partnership capital to other apartment developers right now. So not only are we building our own product, we're also banking other developers, and that's doing a lot of different things. It allows us to bring obviously capital to the project and some expertise in the field, but then we're also bringing Garrett Construction and all of our other related arms to help them. And I'll give you a case in point. We have a project in Aurora, Colorado that developer came to us. They had a capital need, but they also had a construction issue because their costs were astronomically high. We were able to come in, provide the capital, but we also provided a cost basis, a construction cost that was $20,000 a unit lower than their current third-party bid. So that translated into a $7 million savings on the project. Well, that $7 million savings on the projects translates into a deal that's now financeable. So the banks were willing to step up and do it. Because of our backing, the banks wanted to be involved as well. They were able to raise the additional capital because the deal now makes sense. And We have about, 15 projects right now in our pipeline, all TELUS capital driven third party properties. So
Is TELUS under the Garrett umbrellas or is that separate?
it is.
It is? Okay. It's all part. So we'll hit on some of that stuff in a little bit. I wanted to go backwards real quick. So when you were a small child, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Evansville, Indiana.
So in a profile in Inc. magazine a few years back, you said that you grew up in a single parent household, pretty close to the poverty line. Is that right?
I would say we were below it. Yeah.
And there was a really interesting little segment of that story describing you at 5 years old, you, I think, and your mom moving into your first apartment, and like what a big deal that was. Yeah. I mean, it sticks out in my mind today. I can remember. I remember the smell outside. I mean, it was that, important of a moment in my life. I think, watching my mom. Well, prior to that, she didn't have a driver's license. I mean, we were riding the bus together for her to go to work, and then I would go to my grandparents' house on the bus alone. And she built, this savings herself, working hard in an industry she didn't, she just kind of lucked into, and was able to work her way up to get this first apartment. And I remember we went down, we paid the first month's installment of rent and the deposit, and we literally had, I may be a little off on this, but it was like $2 maybe. I think we had $2 left, and she wasn't even paid till the next day. And obviously we hadn't had dinner and we're hungry, and we walked down to the grocery store. It was about 3 blocks away, and we're all excited. And she said, "Just pick out whatever you want for dinner." And of course, I'm 5 years old. I grabbed a bag of cheese puffs, and that was our dinner. And that was, I remember that still today. So the greatest cheese puffs I ever had. What do you remember about that apartment?
At the time, it was fantastic. I still remember that there were issues with it, typical maintenance issues that weren't being really addressed well. The area wasn't, it wasn't crime ridden, but it wasn't also the most safe location, so there was a little bit of concern about getting to the bus stop and getting on the bus safely. And, there were things that happened that just, it was a very urban lifestyle, and near the poverty line. So,
did you have your own bedroom, or did your mom stay in the same room?
I actually did. We had a 2-bedroom, so I had my own bedroom. So
nice.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, we didn't have air conditioning. There's another moment. I remember when she bought our first window unit, and we put it in my bedroom, which was really cool.
You're joking. How did you swing that?
I don't know. I guess she spoiled me. So.
Yeah, I had to sleep in my mom's bedroom when I was a kid. So that is just fascinating. Now, of course, it's not lost on me that what you do for a living now is you make apartments. Is there any connection there? Any special affinity that you had?
Absolutely. You mean a connection to just apartments in general because of that?
Yeah, because I'm assuming you guys probably lived in a few apartments, maybe.
If you walked around and you asked all of our superintendents and all of our project managers, something that I say quite a few things over and over again, but there's one thing that I tell them when it comes to the finish of our apartments, and I say it every single time: you need to make sure that when this apartment's turned over, it is of the quality you would want your mother to live in. And when I walk into the property, if I see something that is just obviously not done right or not, was rushed through, I just always ask the same thing: would you leave it like this for your own mom? I mean, and of course the answer is no. So we fix it. I take pride in knowing that, we're turning over homes for people, and yeah, okay, it's not the same exact setting that I was in, but we're still turning over homes for people. You want them to be comfortable. You want them to be clean. You want them to be produced exactly how you would want it, how you'd want to turn it over to your mother. So, that's the lesson I learned. I feel like that comes to maintenance as well. If you have a problem in an apartment, if we're not jumping all over it, shame on us. It's our job to provide an apartment home that's free of defect. So,
my folks were divorced. My dad lived in apartments afterwards, and I always thought they were super cool. I mean, I loved the whole idea of living in an apartment, but they really weren't designed from a child's point of view. I mean, right. Nothing to do. Yeah, and I mean, you don't have your own yard. You walk up and down the stairs for fun. Do you ever approach your design process thinking about, not just, the person who's paying the bill, but the rest of the family?
We do, but the market segment that we deliver to is a little different. So one of our criteria for building an apartment deal, and I won't get into all of them, it's kind of a proprietary model, but one of the things we look for are good school systems. Now, is it because we have a lot of kids on our projects? No. And we've done the math. We've only looked at the demographics because we get asked this at the city a lot, at the cities we build in. But we only have a handful of actual children in any one of our projects. In today's world, the typical renter is either a empty nester or a new household being formed, or a new individual getting out of college, or a new marriage, or once again, 55 and older, not the typical family with young kids running around. And we've built projects with, playgrounds and other things, and they just don't get used. So we've helped that situation in a lot of cases. In most cases, we're aligned with, parks and other recreational opportunities that are just there. So, if you're at our property, you can walk across the street. And, markets like Colorado, for example, make it really easy because you can build on a trail system anywhere in the Front Range, and you can find your way to a park or some place to hang out outside. So you then went to Indiana State University, mm-hmm. and what were you studying there? Political science, pre-law, with a minor in history.
Okay, I did not expect you to say that.
I was going to be the next F. Lee Bailey. I was going to go to law school.
Are you serious? Your heroes were lawyers?
Honestly, you think about it, I grew up in apartments, and we moved out of the apartment. We ended up moving. So the man that is my dad, that didn't have to be my dad, he met my mom when I was probably 11, and with the dual income, we were able to move on to single family home, and a little more suburban location and that type of thing, and then that set the trajectory of my life. But we obviously weren't wealthy, and it's not like my parents were investing in real estate. So to me, growing up, I had no idea how things worked in the real estate industry. Yeah, I saw shopping centers. I didn't know who owned them. For all I knew, the tenants owned them. Same with office buildings, same with apartments. Who knows who owns those? Maybe the government owns them. I have no clue. So going through college is really no different. Real estate was not something that was in my sight, and I definitely wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. So lawyer seemed like a reasonable occupation. I'd passed I'd taken the LSAT. I was on my way, applying at schools, and was actually playing a game of pool at a bar with a really old guy. And I say old guy because he was probably my age now, but seemed old to me in college, right? And he, it was a good round of pool, I guess, because at the end of it, he said, "Hey, I'm president of a bank. Would you want to come work for us in our credit analyst department and be a lender someday?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds like a great idea," because I don't know, law school seemed great, but I wasn't really excited about going back to school. So
yeah, it wasn't a job offer.
That's right. So, I thought, why not? Let's take a chance. And, that obviously opened up a door into banking, which opened up a door into real estate. I was funding a project, and it was a shopping center deal, and I was on the financing side, and I was working, tirelessly to get this loan done, and ultimately went to the closing table. And this is back in the 90s. So keep in mind, we were still writing checks and handing out checks. It wasn't like we were wiring money everywhere. So I'm at the closing table, wrote a check or handed a check to the broker that was involved, and realized that he made 3 or 4 times on that project, that one sale, what I did an entire year banking. So that made me think, well, maybe I should talk to this guy. So I started chatting with him, and next thing you know, I'm in Chicago selling real estate at Marcus and Millichap, and selling investment real estate, primarily apartments, throughout the Midwest. I met a developer, started doing a lot of sales for him. We had a great run together, and he asked me to come on and be his head of development. Once again, no development experience, but I understood banking, and I understood brokerage and how the deals come together and how to make a deal. So I thought, well, why not? Let's give it a try. And it turned out to be a really good opportunity and learned a lot about the business. And that was with Steve Bodner, the SC Bodner Company. Steve is a great mentor of mine. Many of the principles that I use today, were instilled on me by Steve. Would definitely not understand the construction process as I do today if it wasn't for Steve. So big anchor in my career. And, we did a lot of projects together. And from there, set off on my own. So
what was then your vision for the Garrett companies when you founded it in 2014? It sounds like you really had a strong idea of how you wanted it to turn out.
Yeah. Our industry has a lot of turnover in it. It's a very, I won't say cutthroat. That sounds bad, but it's a very, very intense work environment. It's very fast paced, a lot of deadlines, a lot of pressure. You see turnover, turnover of some of our peer companies can be 30%, especially on the construction side, where people just come and go as they please. And I saw that as always being very disruptive. And I really wanted to understand the root cause of that. And I really believe the root cause of that is in most integrated companies, there's still this separation between development, construction, and management. So something goes wrong in construction, they point the finger at development points the finger at construction, they point the finger at management, and it's just chaos all the time, people infighting. So number one, I wanted to create a work environment where everybody understood the role that they played and the fact that a dollar lost on development, a dollar lost on construction, a dollar lost at management was a dollar that the company lost, not that division. Two, a place where, a lot of companies, they throw a project manager, for example, in construction, they throw him out on the island and they say, oh, here you go. Here's your $50 million construction project. Don't screw it up. And they're juggling a lot of balls. There's a lot of decisions that are made every single day that affect time, quality, and price. And they are making these decisions the best they can, but it doesn't always align with what the whole company needs. And then inevitably what happens is you get to the project, they're scared to show any losses. At the end of the job, all of a sudden, oh, wait, by the way, here's $1 million in change orders. And everybody's throwing their hands up. Everybody's mad at each other. That guy gets fired. He goes to another job. It's just this constant battle. So I wanted to create an environment where that didn't happen. So we do a lot of things collaboratively. If a project manager has an issue on one of our projects that involves time, quality, or cost, he does so by talking with our construction committee. And, we talk through it together. We make a decision together. If it's the right decision, we celebrate together. If it's the wrong decision, it's my fault. And I'm fine with that. I'll take the blame on everything because I was involved in the decision-making process. So, but it's created an environment where we have 5% turnover and only 3% voluntary turnover. And, when it comes to our peer, that's why we have, 30 plus awards of best places to work in various different journals around the country, because that was one of our key goals in creating this entity. Beyond that, it was executing the game plan. We have a model that works. We stick to that model. It's not flashy. We're not going to be on Forbes for some flashy business model, but at the same time, we're not going to end up in the IBJ as a bankruptcy. So we're very specific about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and we stick to the same exact program over and over and over and over again because it works.
I mean, even something, I don't want to call this something as simple as vertical integration, but there are a lot of developers out there who don't try to take on all of those different roles the way you have. I mean, I'm assuming that it was kind of an unusual way to try to start a development company. Well, you had your construction arm, I think, within the first year, I think.
Well, we knew it was a key piece of it. The construction piece of it, no doubt. We knew that we needed to build the projects. We knew we needed to control that cost. We knew that, that was going to be a key component of us being successful. There's the development process that, once again, it's very specific, very targeted. And then there's the construction process, which is very specific, very targeted. So those two combined is really the value creator. That's how we're creating the value that we are for our stakeholders. And we're doing a better job than our peers. I've seen this is all anecdotal, but I've seen the pitch decks for groups that are raising funds, and I'm looking at their return profile and realizing that in most cases, we're returning 30 to 40% more. And sometimes we're doubling what their average returns are on our projects. So, but that's done. It's not easy. It takes a very, very concentrated effort to realize margin in every small piece of the construction process, whether that be buying materials, whether that be, the way we deal with subcontractors. I mean, it's very easy to go off and you get if you go bid a project, you may get 12, 15 bids for drywall, for example. Those bids, once they're scoped out and they're apples to apples, because some people bid one thing, not the wrong, whatever. So once you really scope them down and you got apples to apples, those bids can range 30, 40% across the board from the most expensive guy to the least expensive guy. And what the key here is you got to find not necessarily the top price. That doesn't always give you the best quality or the best finish. And the lowest price doesn't always give you the best quality or the best finish. But there's somebody in there that you can work with, that you can help them. In a lot of cases, they're smaller groups that you can help them grow their business. And I can't tell you how many times we've taken a small operation, a small drywall or a small painter or a small concrete company, and we've helped them scale their business to 100 plus people and work on a lot of our projects that way. Because we're helping them. Look, day one, if we would have handed them the check for the job, they would have went off and bought a new truck and been happy. But when we explain that, look, let's hold off on the truck. We're going to pay your guys directly. Have them come to the job trailer. We're going to hand them checks. And then we're going to give you your piece of it. And let's keep this thing rolling. We'll help you pay your bills. Let us pay them direct. Let's grow your business together. And you know what? 5 projects from now, you'll have a fleet of trucks. Just work with us. And that process has worked very, very well, partnering with our subcontract base. Once again, it is not easy. It's labor intensive. It's like running a whole separate business entity, but it's somewhat necessary to drive the cost basis that we do.
Wow, that was fascinating. Okay, let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast in my interview with Eric Garrett of the Garrett Companies. At the very beginning, 2014, your office was in a shed in your backyard.
Well, it was. I know the article you're talking about. It was, where it started from a barn or something like that.
Yeah, right.
I will say that it was probably the nicest barn that any company was ever started out of. So I'd had a certain level of success prior to the Garrett Company's leap off. So it was a very nice barn. But yes, okay. It was me in a barn.
So there was no gas can back there. The lawnmower wasn't in the shed.
No.
It was a nice shed.
It was nice. There was a nice bar there.
So, oh, wow. Okay.
A party barn.
Okay. I was about to say, when you hire your first employee, how do you persuade him or her to work for an apartment developer based in a barn?
That's actually a funny story. So right off the bat, my first hire was going to be a head of development. And I was looking for somebody that had a civil engineering background, had some scale and some projects. And so I went out on this national search and I got resumes in from all over the country and was actually down to one gentleman from New York and one gentleman from Ohio. And they bought into the system because, once again, it was a startup, but I had a pretty big track record of being partners on big deals. So, it wasn't like it was that it wasn't that hard of a job, right? And I also had 3 projects already under contract and moving forward. And it was an easy sale really to hire somebody. But ultimately, I decided I'm going to take one more look through the resumes, make sure I didn't miss something. And at the very last resume I looked at, I noticed that he lived in Greenwood, Indiana, which is where I was at the time. And I looked at his address. I thought, well, that seems pretty close because my property line abutted a golf course community. So I looked up the address and realized that I could probably hit a driver from my edge of my property to his house. And I thought that was hilarious because I'm looking at his resume and, he's Rose Holman guy, graduated towards the top of his class, was building designing airport projects around the country and had a big hand in the Detroit airport and then Indianapolis airport and LaGuardia, their expansion. So he's, was a naval engineer in San Diego for a while. So he had a great resume and he lived right down the street. And I'd never heard of him because he'd been traveling all over the country doing this project. So I gave him a call, and he always jokes because our interview took place at Applebee's because it was the closest place we could get to and have lunch together. So made my first hire at an Applebee's, but that was Ken Koziel, and Ken is with us today. He runs our design group, and but so from there it just kind of snowballed. And the key team that we hired, our first 7 or 8 hires are still with us today and still thriving in the company and are in high leadership roles. We did lose our COO, Matt Griffin, unfortunately, to a battle with cancer this year, which was a real tough loss. He was such an architect in the culture that we created. And, beyond that, the core team is still together.
You mentioned, you're doing third-party construction work now for clients. You also offer like third-party interior design services, landscape architecture services. What's the strategy there? Why go third party?
Well, it's just a revenue generator. I mean, and we're, once again, I think from a third party standpoint, well, let's talk about interior design, landscape design. Absolutely. It's just about creating revenue and making those business units profitable outside of what we do at the Garrett companies. And it shows them what other groups are doing as well. We can kind of start looking at, things that maybe we need to add or not add to our projects. And, the majority of the projects we're dealing with it's not like we're competing with these groups, they're in other geographic locations, but, it gives us good education there and obviously keeps that entity as a revenue generating entity. On the third party construction side, obviously we're doing a lot of that to bolster TELUS in that group because, the reason for TELUS for me personally was I was looking at it as an alternate method of investment and, putting capital that I have at work and an outside group in other projects. And I also thought it would be a way to help mentor young developers, grow their business. Now, what's actually happened there is that the groups that we're dealing with really don't need any mentorship. A lot of them have been in business longer than I have, but they don't have, the in-house construction capabilities and the ability to bring in basis. So that's why that's worked. And so that's growing a big portion of our third-party construction platform. But we are doing third-party construction work outside of TELUS. And a lot of people ask me why. Why would you help a competitor? Because in a lot of cases, they're building close to some of our projects. So why would you help a competitor get a compelling cost basis to go compete with you? And the real answer is, it's a short-term piece of competition. So I don't see it being, I wouldn't do something if I thought it was going to break the market. But bigger picture, the more construction volume that we do, the more subcontractor base that we work with, and we somewhat corner the market. The deals that we have in the pipeline right now, I mean, in markets like, the Front Range in Denver or down in, Orlando or Fort Myers or Tampa or Phoenix, we will be one of the larger third party or just builders in general in those submarkets. And that comes with a lot of control of some contract base. It comes with a lot of control of pricing. It comes with, we're going to be one of the groups that every sub wants to be on the bid list for, which, it's a numbers game. If I can get 25 quality subs to bid a project, I'm going to get a better, more cost-effective price. Now, there is one little piece to this that I think is very important, because when I talk about price and I talk about subs, and I talk about controlling price, most people think, oh, well, he's just going in, getting the best price he can. Who cares about the sub? Well, I think I've told you that obviously a big piece of this is the relationship piece with the sub. But even if it's somebody we're doing a one-off project with, and this goes across the entire company, one of the things that I set out to at the beginning, and I really believe in, is that in a deal, it doesn't matter if it's a construction contract, a subcontract agreement, buying a car, it doesn't matter what it is. If both sides aren't making a nickel, if there's not a good deal being made where both sides are profitable, it's not a good deal. And it's not one that's going to work out well. It's not going to work out well for us or the sub. We may think it works out well for us in the short term, but in the long term, I've seen so many companies go down the path of, I don't care about the sub. I'm going to work the best deal I can. I'm going to manipulate the contract. I'm going to force him into doing work that may or may not be a part of his contract because I'm the bigger guy. And if we go to court, I'll win. He'll be too scared to sue me, blah, 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 blah. I've seen this happen across the industry so many times. All it does is create chaos. It creates a sub work base that doesn't want to work for you. Mm-hmm. It makes it difficult to find subs to work for you. And there are peer groups out there that I know of in our general market that do that for a living. And it's just not a good way of going about business.
You mentioned the first interview that you had at Applebee's. And I know early on, one of the company's calling cards almost was the very intentional hiring process. I think where anybody you brought on would sort of need to be vetted by people in 3 different departments. Is that right? Did I read that right? You have grown so much. Are you still able to devote that much attention to the hiring process? Does that still work the way it did before, or is it different?
Well, yes, it does. And I used to call that the 3-touch rule. That somebody in marketing and HR told me that's a bad idea to call it that. But we, so it's now.
It probably is. You're right.
So, it is, but it is very well intact. Yes, if you're going to be hired at the Garrett companies, you're going to meet with 3 different groups, 3 different facets of the company. It doesn't really matter which ones, and you're going to be vetted probably less on yes, if you're a development manager, somebody from the development team is going to meet with you, and they're going to be looking at your background. Do you bring the capabilities, the educational background? Can you do what we need done from a functional side? But then you're going to meet with 3 other people from various departments that are not looking at that. They could care less if you know what a plat is or a survey. They want to know that if they're sitting down talking to you, is it a cultural fit? Are we going to enjoy being with each other? Because, we spend as much time with our coworkers as we do our family in some cases. So we might as well make sure we all like each other and we get along and we all buy into the same concepts, because if not, it's going to be kind of a miserable life.
As the company has grown and you've experienced kind of the different seasons in the life of a startup and then an established company, how has your role as CEO changed? I mean, is it different now than it was at 5 years old, different than when you were 2 years old?
100%. My role now is a facilitator, and I'm looking at, if you think of it as a water hose, and the water, you turn the water on, the water doesn't come out. That's probably because the hose is kinked, right? So you have 2 or 3 hoses or 2 or 3 kinks in your hose, and you're trying to, there's different methods. You can turn on higher pressure and try to blow the kink out, or you find out where the kink is and you undo the hose. And I'm kind of the guy that's running up and down the line trying to find the kink and untwisting it and letting the water flow. And that's my job. So I'm looking at anywhere I see a hinge point that is preventing us from meeting our goals. And that's it. That's all I do every day. I solve issues. I've in place Rob Martinson has now been named the president of the company. He's doing a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff, making sure that, things are flowing together. Our head of operations, Jamie Allen, is, right there by his side. Once again, just making sure that we're functioning from, entity to entity. The policies and procedures are being followed, things of that nature. And then we have a very robust, I call it a strategic advisory team that's, comprised of all of our leaders in our company. And, we're meeting quite frequently. But once again, I'm very focused on immediate needs to fix problems that are preventing us from hitting our goal, whether it's our big picture goal or just our weekly goal. So that's my, all the things I love. I mean, when I got into the business, and still my passion is finding deals, finding sites, underwriting the sites, figuring out what's going on the site. I don't get to do a whole lot of that anymore. But that's okay, because we got a good team of people that are doing that.
Well, this is great. I mean, I have covered real estate here or been involved in the real estate coverage here for about 20 years. And just in the last hour, I feel like I've gotten 25% smarter. This is terrific. Thank you for explaining to my 4th grade self how this works. It is honestly just brilliant. And I really appreciate the time that you spent with us.
No, I appreciate you having me. And Yeah, likewise. It's been a good conversation.
My thanks again to Eric Garrett. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few stories in the latest issue of IBJ I want to bring to your attention. First up, how much money should hospital CEOs earn? In central Indiana, where hospital prices and profits have come under the microscope, some consumer advocates are pointing to big executive pay packages and say the issue is ripe for review. John Russell has the story. Also in this week's paper, Dave Lindquist has an accounting of the final set of grants from the Crystal DeHaan Family Foundation, which is distributing its final $55 million. And Leslie Weidenbender reviews the distinguished career of former Purdue University president and Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, this year's recipient of IBJ's Michael A. Carroll Award for impactful community service. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And thanks again for making time for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.